Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's been like a month since we've done one of these, so we're slightly out of practice. But today, just making sure it's working. Great. So today we are going to talk about the science of ceremony, more specifically, the neuroscience. You might bring in other science, I guess, I don't know. But we'll see.
What
Science
other
and
is there?
neuroscience of ceremony and belonging, which are very much interrelated. And we have a weekend immersion happening in about a little less than a month. It starts November 13th. It's just 3 days online. An immersion into self-designed ceremony with guidance and support. And part of that 3-day immersion will include a time for your own self-designed ceremony. And so in support of that, we're going to be speaking to ceremony, I think, in our own lives and so much more. So if you want to learn about that program, you can go to our website. I will put a comment in the, I'll put a comment in the comments. I'll put the link in the comments if you are watching on Facebook. Otherwise, the link will be below the video if you're watching on YouTube or some other way. Okay, oh boy, there we go. I almost hit the very wrong button.
Uh-oh, it would be like jettison or explosion button?
The end live video button.
End lives button.
Okay, take it away, Ms. Thomas.
Well, how about, so really what we're talking about, what we really always talk about is belonging. And in this case, we're talking about the neurology of belonging, and we're talking about what practices nourish our human neurology of belonging. And it's a really particular, it's a precise neurology that we have as human beings. We've dived in headlong into this love affair with the autonomic nervous system. And I think we've done a beautiful job really humanizing it. So paradoxically, or ironically, I guess is really the word, oftentimes it's dehumanized, and we've humanized it into this.
Can I replace the word humanized with embodied versus disembodied? Does that feel
perfect.
True?
Yes.
Okay. Feels more accurate to me.
Yeah, and more in line with our vocabulary too. So we've embodied this idea, this concept of belonging, which is just such a deeply embodied experience that really, if we are embodied, genuinely embodied, and we've started talking about this term erotic embodiment rather than just embodiment. But erotic embodiment really is the embodiment of belonging and the way of being in our bodies that is that predisposes us to belonging and nourishes our belonging. And so when we're talking about ceremony and the neuroscience of ceremony, we're really talking about the neurobiology of belonging, and ceremony as being one of those practices and engagements that we undertake to nourish, nurture, foster our experience of belonging. And also you're going to read a quote in a minute, and I just love this quote, this piece, because it lets us know that our belonging matters to others, and not just human others. Our belonging and our experience of belonging and our behaving as if we belong matters to the world itself. So, we're going to talk about the neurology of belonging, but we're probably going to spend a whole lot more time talking about things that are harder to quantify, harder to become to bring over into the empirical, world of facts and figures.
Can I ask you a question first?
I think so.
You can say no. But why do you like bringing the science in? Why does that matter?
Um, because I think it's really helpful to understand that I think I just understood why you asked this question. You're a crafty fox. Because we're designed, designed is a loaded word, but we're designed to belong. And it's so wonderful when we get to look at the science and we notice that the science predisposes us to belong and predisposes us to wellness, that we say a lot of the times life preferences wellness. But for so many people, that is just such an impossible thing to imagine when their lives feel so negative and they're predisposed to what's not well. And when we look at the science, we realize that the autonomic nervous system really is predisposed to orient us to our belonging. And it works very hard to do that. So science supports this numinous experience we have of being well. And when we know the science, we can really utilize what is wired into us, and what is intrinsic to us, to our benefit. So
great. I like bringing the science in for other reasons also. What are reasons? Well, being in Boulder, surrounded by people who are up to all kinds of things that we sometimes derogatorily refer to as woo-woo stuff, where it can just feel a little bit I don't know what, just like a little too out there, a little too something. So I have that allergy, I like to call it. And growing up in the church, I was already predisposed to an allergy to anything that sort of feels related to that in some way. And so I know for me, I worked through this in other ways before I knew any of the science of it. But for me, knowing the science and watching clients and students come to understand the science, it can help cut through some of those biases against things like ceremony, because it brings in this like, oh, this actually does something. It's not just some woo-woo weird shit that people are doing that makes them feel good. It actually does something to us that's really necessary and beneficial.
Yes, in fact, that only recently we've forgotten.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Do you want me to read this thing?
Oh, it's so hard not to just keep talking. Yes, I would love to hear this quote. It's so beautiful.
Okay, so this is from a book, Braiding Sweetgrass. It's lovely. I've just been reading it for the last couple of days, and it makes me weep in moments, which for me is always a sign of a good book. But she's talking about this small ceremony.
Just say her name.
Oh, sorry. Robin Wall Kimmerer. Robin Wall Kimmerer.
There we go.
But she's talking about this ceremony that her father would do every morning. He would make coffee. They spent their summers up in the Adirondacks. Christiane knows this place well, or this area well, this land. And he would make coffee and he would pour the first bit onto the land, and thank the mountain that they were on, and address the mountain as he was doing it. And so she says, but still every morning I watch the coffee disappear into the crumbly brown hummus. Is that how you say that word, even when it's not referring to the food?
Okay. Humus.
Humus. Sorry.
I'm sure everyone says it all different ways.
The crumbly brown humus, as if returning to itself. In the same way that the flow of coffee down the rock opens the leaves of the moss, ceremony brought the quiescent back to life, opened my mind and heart to what I knew but had forgotten. The words in the coffee called us to remember that these woods and lakes were a gift. Ceremonies, large and small, have the power to focus attention to a way of living awake in the world. I'll read that one again. Ceremonies, large and small, have the power to focus attention to a way of living awake in the world. The visible became invisible, merging with the soil. It may have been a secondhand ceremony, but even through my confusion, I recognize that the earth drank it up as if it were right. The land knows you, even when you are lost.
Mm. Oh my gosh, where do we go from there? One of the things I love about that quote, and I'll say it again now that you all have the quote in your ringing in your ears and your hearts, is that it speaks to the relationship that we have with the world itself, which really is required. Our understanding of, participation and acknowledgement of is required in this experience of belonging. What we belong to, that we matter to what we belong to, that we matter to the earth. Ceremony, in the way that Robin is describing it, is a way to feed the earth and be grateful for the earth and all the beings of the earth, human and otherwise. But it's also a way to say, I'm here in this map of belonging. I belong here and I'm participating. So there's neurology behind all of this, and mostly we find it when we turn to the neurology of prayer, of gratitude. There's an entire segment of research, which is one of the most well-funded segments of research. It's hard to get funded these days for research, and the science of happiness and the research of happiness, interestingly, perhaps not surprisingly, is some of the most well-funded research. And it's under that umbrella that we find all this wonderful confirming data. It adds the science to what we intuitively know here at the VC and the IEI, what we intuitively know about the importance of ceremony to our experience of belonging and to our experience of wellness. So let's take even just a few minutes here to describe what it is we mean by ceremony. And we don't have to get too laborious here, but what do we mean? What do you consider ceremony, Alyssa? And why have you really begun, I think, why have you oriented your well-being and your life to include self-designed ceremony?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's such a lovely distinction between ceremony and ritual that we like to make, where, there's everyday rituals. Really what Robin Kimmerer is talking about in this book is more of a ritual than a ceremony. These daily things that some of us do. I mean, we do so many things every day that can be turned into rituals. Just stepping through our door on the way home from work or wherever, or making tea or coffee in the morning, are such beautiful opportunities to recognize that something is happening and to make a ritual out of it. And I hold that as distinct from ceremony, really, in the way that ceremony is something that I use to mark changes or transformations, transitions that have happened, to initiate them. Also, sometimes if I'm like stepping into something, it's like, okay, let me do some ceremony to get all the unseen parts of myself and the world on board and aware that this is happening. And also to be seen and known in that by community. So sometimes bringing other people in to witness ceremony has been a part of what I've gotten up to. And they serve as such beautiful reminders. It's like an anchor point for me to come back to, that I can feel in myself afterwards, of, oh yeah, like this, like I declared something here. Something happened in this ceremony. And I can sort of touch back in with it afterwards to remind myself. Did I answer your question at all? I just kind of went off on a thing.
No, you did. I think you did. You did. And one of the things you spoke to just a little in your like third to last sentence just now, you were speaking to about declaring the transformation or a thing that's about to happen or a thing you want to really initiate into being to your people. That part of
Mhm.
what you get up to in ceremony is this announcement, and that's what ceremonies are in our culture. What is left of them is that they tend to be an announcement, like a wedding ceremony or graduation ceremony. They're a way to say, hey people, I'm different on this side of it. I just spent $120,000 in student loans and all this time, and I now have this piece of paper that says something about me. I've been initiated into something, and
Mhm.
people recognize this. And I'm curious if you could even speak to a little, just give us a short list of the people, because you are one of those people who, one of those humans who sees people as humans as people, but birds are people too. And your
Mhm.
ancestors are people, and the trees are people, and the water is people. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so, who can you give us a sense of, maybe in your last ritual, if you
Mhm.
can recall, who were the people who were you were announcing your initiation?
Yeah, I mean, it was recent. It was just a couple of weeks ago that I did a pretty involved ceremony, and there were some literal people that knew that it was happening that I need to follow back up with
So
afterwards to fill them
human
in.
people.
You being one of them, yes,
Yeah,
human
yeah,
people.
human people.
um,
Mhm.
but I was up in the mountains, and there was this out the window. There was this huge mountain peak, um, and that was one of the people that was very much witnessing and participating in the ceremony that I was undertaking. Um, I mean, it feels endless. I don't know that I could even tell you all the people who are involved.
Yeah.
Ancestors, absolutely. I did some things with different objects, and all of the beings that those objects came from and that participated in their creation and into them being in my hands felt like they were witness to and a part of, and also spoken or recognized in that, which isn't always true. But in this particular one, it felt really clear that they were. So it feels, yeah, so
Yeah.
many.
So many, so many. One of the things that, to bring this into the sort of the science,
Mm.
the studies and the measurements, and maybe the facts of all of this. I don't know. Hard to not get to stumble up on the word.
Particular kind of facts,
Yes, exactly. There we go. A particular kind of
observable,
fact,
measurable facts, which is not the
right?
only way of
Repeatable.
knowing the world.
Repeatable. We're talking about, science is all about being able to replicate a thing, to
Yes.
make a thing predictable. And so one of the predictable things that we know about what you're talking about, this activity you're talking about engaging in, which is both ritual and ceremony. You have ritual within your
Mhm.
ceremonies, like you light candles and you might burn some herbs or incense, or we do a lot of smudging in this town, and I'm not discounting smudging, but that it's just a ubiquitous way for, I think, particularly, white settler culture to feel like they've stepped across a threshold and are engaging in something, because it's a millennia old practice of purifying. Um, so when we're engaging in that process that you're describing, where there's ritualized practices within a context of ceremony for the purposes of, well, predicated on the fact that you belong, that somebody's paying attention, that it
Mm.
matters that you're showing up, you enter that neurological brain state, which is, maybe somewhere between, it's probably somewhere between alpha and theta brain states, which is an important, it's interesting thing to look up, what happens in our different brain states as opposed to gamma and beta. but alpha and theta, more alert, but meditative, into deep meditative, transcendental meditative states where you are deeply intuitive, oftentimes when you're entering into ritual space where you're doing ritualized behaviors, where you're slowing down and you're focusing your attention on a particular intention, and you're opening up your experience to include, to contact and include more than just you, to say, I am here and this matters. And you're going through these things, you're burning some herbs, and maybe you're drinking a particular tea, and you've grounded and anchored yourself into your belonging here on earth so that you feel powerful and present, and you're bringing in a certain kind of mindfulness. We enter into a brain state that itself creates wellness, that creates the not only more of a capacity to feel our belonging, but it also releases dopamine and serotonin, and in some cases oxytocin, depending on what we're getting up to in our ritual and our ceremony. And those, right, all sorts of things. Those, if we're holding our dog, our beloved dog, for instance, or if we're even holding bird wings, can bring us into, because they're so tactile and there's such a creature element to them. We can feel the benefits of oxytocin, but certainly serotonin and dopamine.
Well, I just want to say too, self-pleasure was a part of this ceremony for me. It wasn't planned. It actually just arose in the ceremonial space, and that certainly drops in some oxytocin.
I'll say, absolutely it does. Yep. And many other, it's like that chemical cocktail is very powerful in terms of our belonging, if we acknowledge that we belong beforehand. And ceremony is especially ceremony and community, where you get witnessed and you are acknowledged for what you're about to step into. There is the neurochemical cocktail of belonging is right there. So you going off and having an experience with all those people, some of them human, because we knew you were heading out there, but many of them not human, other than human, is itself an act of wellness that then predisposes us to, we were talking beforehand, a sort of wellness insurance, that the more you engage in these sort of practices that require you to acknowledge that you matter and you belong, that help you enter into brain states that then create the chemistry of belonging, of being part of something that is larger than you, of wellness, of resilience, of joy and gratitude, these deep mindful states that do these very things predictably, that just creates this thing we call a positive feedback loop, that then just creates more of itself. And that's the kind of thing we want to engage in. Yeah.
I want to layer something in, which is those brain states can sometimes be really obvious, and like I've had certainly what we could call peak experiences during ceremonies with no other kind of alteration to my mind besides the ceremony. So I haven't ingested anything or smoked anything, whatever. And mostly they're really, really subtle and gentle for me. And so learning how to, this goes back to all that we've been talking about around pleasure for the last, I don't know, several months. You can find other videos on this on our Facebook Lives page, but of just how we have to slow down and get quiet so that we can really tune into the experience that is happening. Because if you don't, like, it would be easy to miss so many things that are going on, that I now know the neurology behind, some of the brain states and all of that, but also just, I mean, you don't have to know that to be in the experience itself. So it's quite subtle.
Yeah, you don't have to know it. You just have to trust yourself. It is quite subtle, isn't it? Because what we're what we've been doing a lot of teaching on in these last few weeks in our Reclaiming Erotic Pleasure class has been around the reward pathway and
Mm.
the reward mechanism and the pleasure pathways in the brain, and that we're very vulnerable to these high octane, immediate sort of machine gun experiences of pleasure, like swiping, 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 and liking, 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 and just the high octane, high dopamine pleasure of
Immediate.
foods, yes,
Yeah.
and media of certain kinds of foods, and also the really just the numbing down, the kind of just give me some relief from the craziness of what's happening in the world right now, the numbing down experience. And you're describing that there's a really particular sweet spot there that is that alpha theta brain state that allows us to listen with different ears and sense with different sensory feelers what is happening, and to feel into and honor and then even nurture, move deeper into this experience of presence, mindfulness, intention, attention, careful, quiet attention placed on a particular idea or longing or practice, ritual behavior. So yeah, so you're describing that. I'm curious if you've noticed, I'm going to put you on the spot here because I didn't ask you about this ahead of time. But I'm curious if you've noticed anything that you could speak to in general now, after these last really number of years that you've been honing the ceremonialist and the ritualist of you. Is there anything you would say feels different, or in this way that we're talking about resilience and belonging?
Yeah, I mean, it came into my life in tandem with so many different practices and resources, so it's hard to tease it apart exactly, but there's such a feeling of the benevolence of the world that comes with it, and of the animation of it. It's not this inert thing, lifeless thing that I exist in somehow. There's like a whole web that I'm participating in, and ceremonies has certainly been one of the ways of recognizing that and feeling into that, and not just, and of genuinely experiencing it. I've had experiences in ceremonies of stuff happening that is outside of what my conscious mind can create. Where it comes from, I don't know, but there's this feeling of being plugged into something that's far bigger than me, and that is needing me and supporting me at the same time. So that's not, that's sort of general, but it feels really specific at the same time.
Yes, and I want to say, what do they say in the film industry? They say that's a wrap. Because there's nothing that is such the beautiful firsthand flesh and blood endorsement of Eros ceremony and belonging, of just why we do what we do. And and come join us and do it with us. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's been one, because I took on meditation and relational practices and different embodiment practices and psychotherapy and all kinds of things, and there's something about ceremony that without it, I don't think the rest of those things would be as resourcing and supportive as they are. It's like it brings so much together. It's integrative, and like it ties things together in a way that these other ways of operating in the world can't quite get at.
Yes.
So
And
It's
and
really
if
important.
I'm hearing you, it actually underscores and
Mm,
supports whatever it is we're doing in those other endeavors like therapy and
mhm,
body-based healing, and that this somehow, and not surprisingly, augments or ties it all together.
mhm. Yeah, and I think some of that is because it deals with, that feels so whatever, I don't like that language, but it's orienting to the whole ecology of everything. So it's not just looking at, like, psychotherapy tends to be more working with our minds, and then spiritual practice is working with that part of ourselves, and embodiment practice is working with our bodies, and there's some way that ceremony and coming in through that door, and it's like it infuses all of that and includes all of that,
Mhm,
and so much more.
mhm.
um,
Right. Yeah.
so
The word ecology or ecological is coming up here, that it allows us to deliver ourselves, our ecological selves, into the ecology of the world. And as Robin Wall Kimmerer is saying, the world pays attention, that
mhm,
the world receives that and is hungry for that. And if we are called to that ceremony, and we're listening well, it's more than just our own gratification that
mhm,
is moving us into that. We are
mhm,
we are part of the map of the world
mhm.
there. So
We could talk about this for so long. I have so
couldn't
many
we
more things I want to say now, but we
go?
should probably stop.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
So, this program, Eros Ceremony and Belonging, is not October, November 13th, 14th, and 15th. It's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Um, and the link is in the comments. We would love to have you join us and the other women who are already signed up. It's
Mhm.
going to be fun,
Wonderful.
among other things.
Among other
When
things.
I say the word fun, I mean it's going to be deep and rich and expansive and hard and funny and very human. And
There we are.
yeah, maybe the whole range. That to me
The
is
whole
fun.
thing. Yeah,
Just to be super clear.
that is helpful, right? It's
Yeah.
it's not it's not going to be a walk in the daisies,
No.
perhaps, or maybe
No.
it will.
You'll
Mhm.
see.
Yeah. Ah, it's so good to have this conversation with you.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Bye
Mhm.
for now.
Mhm.